What's up, everybody? My name's Adam McDormand, and this is Medium Quality. Alright, you know I'm about to be back on my usual nonsense. It's time to talk about prog rock. Now, I've made a couple of these videos over the past couple of weeks where I talk a little bit about my personal history with progressive rock and then show 5 prog rock records that are worth listening to. And I think I want to keep doing that for at least as long as I can sustain it, because no one can stop me. No one's home right now. No one can tell me what to do. So you get to listen to me talk about progressive rock. Smash that like button. In that first prog rock showcase video, I talked about how I was introduced to prog rock. And in the second one, I talked about how I became a Yes fan. Now, there were years in between those 2 points where I was getting into the genre without really knowing what it was or how to define it. Like I said, my dad's friend Andrew from work was burning CDs and sending them along with my dad to give to me. And I would listen to whatever he sent me on my little battery-operated CD player while riding the bus to school in late middle school and into high school. And he sent me stuff like Dream Theater, Spocks Beard, Transatlantic, and a lot of other stuff that I had never heard before. That became as much a part of my musical diet as the other stuff that I was listening to that was like Christian pop punk. And it really sort of bifurcated the way that I think about music. They're like these 2 lanes in my personal history that kind of run side by side one another. I still feel nostalgic for a lot of that Christian underground music to this very day, and you'll hear me talk about that in other venues. But today, I want to talk about the off-ramp that got me deep into prog rock, and talk about 5 more albums. We'll talk about 2 obvious choices for great progressive rock albums that you should listen to. One that may be a little bit off the beaten path, one that's a little bit newer, and one of which we might ask, is this even prog rock at all? First up, an obvious, no-brainer, great prog rock album. This is Fragile by Yes. As long as I do these prog rock showcases, I will probably be trotting out my Yes collection because I love Yes so much. The only copy of Fragile that I currently own on vinyl is the one from the Steven Wilson Remixes box set, which is why this album art looks a little different. And of course I have an entire video doing a deep dive on this entire Remixes box set that you can check out. So as you're looking for a copy of this album to listen to for yourself, it should look a little more like this. Aside from just being a fantastic album, it's really interesting to consider what this album is within the context of what Yes would do next with Close to the Edge. There are 9 tracks on this album. Basically, there are 4 big prog rock tracks on here, and the other 5 songs kind of serve as interludes in between those big progressive rock songs. And each one of those 5 interludes, if we want to call them that, are featuring one of the 5 members of Yes, be it John Anderson, Chris Squire, Bill Bruford, Alan Wakeman, Steve Howe. Each one of them has a track that predominantly centers upon what they bring to the band. As interesting as they often are the reason that I don't spin this album and choose to listen to Close to the Edge instead, because I kind of want to get to the big prog rock tracks. But the more time I've spent with this album, especially as I was doing that deep dive on the box set, I learned to see how beautiful those songs were, and how it highlights the unique talents that each of the members of this classic Yes lineup bring to this band. If not for those 5 monstrous talents crashing into one another in the studio, we wouldn't have Roundabout and South Side of the Sky and Long Distance Runaround and Heart of the Sunrise as these epic, mega, super progressive rock masterpiece type tracks. If you haven't listened to Fragile, you need to listen to Fragile. Full stop. Great album. Next up, we have Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Now, the reason I'm showing this album in this showcase is because I have never listened to it. Over the years, I've collected a handful of Emerson, Lake and Palmer records, and I really haven't spent the time to get to know the band and their catalog. And they are one of the well-known pillars of the prog rock genre in the 70s. I've had a copy of this album for probably close to half a decade, and I don't know that I've ever put it on the turntable. So I'm showing this here as a public act of contrition and to give myself a kick in the tuchus to listen to Tarkus. Next up, we go maybe just a little bit off the beaten path with Moving Waves by Focus. You may see this album titled Focus 2. Now, usually, when people think of Focus, if they think of Focus at all, they think of the song Hocus Pocus by Focus, which is 6.5 minutes of absolute musical insanity that includes, if you can believe it, yodeling, and is somehow still a really awesome rock tune. If that's the only thing that you think of when you think about Focus is Hocus Pocus, then you're missing out. Because if you let this record play, it gets pretty darn proggy. And when I listen to this album and get into those deeper cuts, especially the song Eruption, which is a 22.5 minute prog epic that spans the entirety of side 2 of this record, this sounds like 1971 to me. And I wasn't even born in 1971. I was born like 14 years later. This is an album that may not stand alongside the likes of your, yes, Genesis, King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but it's really good. It's really good. And you got to check it out. Because of the fact that this is not a super well-known band, and they really only have that one song with the yodeling that some people like, but maybe most people hate, you can probably get this fairly inexpensively. Do yourself a favor and check the used bins to see if you can find a copy of this album, because I would bet the barrier to entry is pretty low, and the return on that investment is going to be pretty high. Next up, something a little more modern, we have Spocks Beard's V, or 5, I'm not sure which it's supposed to be, but this is an album from 2000. This is an album that I listened to a lot. Remember a few minutes ago when I said that I would listen to burnt CDs while riding the bus on the way to school? Well, this album was one of the albums that my dad's friend burned for me, and I've listened to this album dozens and dozens of times on cheap headphones while riding the bus with my battery-operated CD player, just praying that the batteries had enough juice to last me the entirety of the trip to school, and hoping that the school bus didn't hit any bumps that were big enough to throw me up into the air and then back down with enough force to cause my little CD player to skip. Spocks Beard prominently features the singing and songwriting of Neil Morse, who, in the gatefold picture, happens to look fairly awkward, if I do say so myself. Who would later go on to found the supergroup Transatlantic that we've talked about before. But I love this album. It's only 6 tracks, the first and last being these massive prog epics, filled out by some more pop-sensible, kind of down-tempo songs. The interesting thing about the vinyl release is that those big prog epics have an entire side of the record all to themselves, which means that the 16.5 minute long At the End of the Day has the entirety of side A to itself, and side C is completely filled with the 27 minute long The Great Nothing, which for me personally can stand alongside some of the greatest tracks from the classic 1970s period of progressive rock. If you haven't heard Spocks Beard, you should check them out. And last, but certainly not least, we have an album of which we might question whether or not it actually even is progressive rock, and that is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard's Nonagon Infinity. This is an incredible album by one of my favorite bands. The conceit of this album is that it is an infinite album, an album that has neither a beginning nor an end. If you listen to this album and put it on repeat, the last track circles right back into the first and it never stops. Which makes it a little bit strange to listen to on vinyl because there are those hard stops. When you turn it over from side A to side B, and from side B back to side A, it has to stop, right? It cannot go infinitely. So this may be one of those rare cases where maybe, just maybe, listening to it on vinyl might not be the best way if you want to get the full experience. Now that doesn't take away anything from the individual songs themselves. It's great listening. I mean, absolutely great listening. It's a psych rock album that leans a little bit toward the rock side of the spectrum and taking with it a little bit of a krautrock influence that puts it kind of in the same universe as progressive rock. It's close enough that if you like some of the more European progressive rock sounds, that I think it'll hit the spot for you. And of course, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard would go on to make many, many albums. They are a prolific band working in a lot of different genres. I mean, almost every single King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard album is distinct from the one that came before it, and will be distinct from the one that comes after it. And that's one of the things I find interesting about this band. It's just great fun to listen to this album, and I think it's worth including it in a discussion of progressive rock. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if for some reason you're really invested in what I'm doing here on this YouTube channel, I'm going to put a link in the description section below where you can get some pretty cool medium quality merch. Until next time, guys, keep spinning that good stuff. What a time to be alive.